Yeah, let me get rid of that. Got it. Okay, you feeling good? Okay. Yeah, let's see. I'll just get this out of the way. Okay. Excellent. Are we good to go, Jess? Yeah. Okay, excellent. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Welcome to the Environmental Communications Seminar and the Program on the Environment at the University of Washington. This is our last public seminar in our series. We take the best for last. Our speaker here in week number 9 is Professor Heather Price of North Seattle College. Professor Price weaves climate science, climate justice, civic engagement, and undergraduate research into general chemistry, while helping both STEM and non-STEM faculty incorporate climate justice and civic engagement into their core curriculum. Welcome, Professor Price. I'm not done.
Yeah, you've got to do your.
So much more to talk about. So for folks here in the audience, if you have questions, please feel free after Professor Price's presentation, raise your hand, ask me questions. I'm hoping for a really good Q&A. If you're online, you can either raise your little digital hand or you can type your comments into the chat and we'll make sure that we ask those questions for you. Okay, so now my actual official introduction. So Dr. Heather Price is a parent, climate scientist, climate justice activist, science educator, and researcher in Seattle. She's a professor of chemistry at North Seattle College and previously conducted her postdoctoral atmospheric chemistry research with the University of Washington program on climate change. Heather does outreach, teaching, writing, and public speaking on the climate crisis and air pollution. She also runs faculty institutes and workshops to help faculty incorporate climate justice and civic engagement into their existing core curriculum. Her current National Science Foundation research project, Climate Justice in Undergraduate STEM Incorporating Civic Engagement, which is short for C-Justice, I like that, yeah. C-Justice, focuses on improving undergraduate STEM education through the integration of climate justice, equity, and civic engagement across the humanities, arts, and STEM curriculum. In addition to a PhD in chemistry, Heather received a BA in East Asian Studies from Western Washington University, which was my alma mater as well. Oh, here we go. How about that? The title of Professor Price's presentation is Science Communication, Let's Talk Climate. All right. Now,
I was expecting there to be a land acknowledgement, and so I just want to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Duwamish in the Salish Sea, and to recognize that if you're from somewhere other than Seattle, please look up whose land we are on, and people are still here, right? The Duwamish are still here, even though they're not a recognized tribe by the United States government. So I'm going to talk about science communication and with a focus on climate. My background is as a climate scientist. I did my postdoc with the program on climate change here at University of Washington, and I have a PhD in chemistry. So I'm a chemistry professor, but I weave climate through my chemistry teaching, and I have for 30 years. And now I help other faculty to do that at the community college level and also here at UW. I've had the honor to work with faculty here. So to get started, oops, doesn't want to let me go there. I want you to, maybe with your neighbor, if you haven't met your neighbor yet, share your name. And if you're online, here, I'll go ahead and share this. Oops, I forgot to have this for the folks that are online. Sorry, folks. Here's where you can go and check CO2 birthday. And I'll talk about what the heck is your CO2 birthday. So if you have your phone, you can use the QR code to do it. I'm not sure how to make that go away, Jess, so people can see the QR code. And let me scoop that. I know I'm trouble. It went away. Oh, it's good. Yeah, you got it, Jess. All right. So my CO2 birthday is 326. That's how many kind of molecules of carbon dioxide were in the air when I was born, 1972, 50 years ago. And today, if you look outside, the levels are much higher, right? They're about 420 is what they reached last year. So I've seen almost an ice age change in carbon dioxide in my lifetime. To put this into perspective, we know that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and that it is also going along with the chat is still popping up, Jess. Sorry. People are introducing themselves, so thanks for the folks online that are doing that as well. So this is one of the ways that I share scientific information with the public. I'm really active, not so much on Twitter anymore. I've switched over to Mastodon, but on Facebook, Instagram, lots of different ways of communicating with the public about climate. And this was a tweet that I did back in 2019 when the carbon dioxide level reached a peak in May. And it's my life in CO2. This has since been turned into an article. It's in Italian, so I can't read it, but yeah. And it goes through my birth date, which was 326, and to when I posted this, which was 415 parts per million, right? If there were 1 million particles of air in a balloon, 326 of them would have been carbon dioxide molecules when I was born. And for each of you, it's going to be a different number, probably a higher number, because you were probably born after me. And we know that it's a greenhouse gas. Oh, also, my address here is climate data. So talking about, how to talk about data, how to talk about science, art and music and fashion is a great way to share climate data, to share information and start a conversation. My friend Helene is wearing the climate data for France, and I'm wearing the global climate data. And then this bar right here is showing the global climate data. So you can see 1850, 1950, and then this data goes through 2020. But you can, I think, I'll share this slide deck with you, Sean, so that folks can go to this website if they want to see, because Ed Hawkins has data for cities, for states, for whole countries. It's really interesting.
Did you consider
I did, but it's too cold. It's way too cold. Yeah, I did consider wearing it. We can tell it's short sleeve and yeah. And another, right, I think that data on my dress is a much more interesting way to show the data compared to a graph like this. It's the same data, right? It's temperature data. In this case, it's, again, 1880, and this time it goes through 2022. And what I find interesting about this is here's 1976. This 0 line represents kind of the average. So it's showing the average for the previous century. Well, that circle right there, that blue circle, is the only year of my life when I was a toddler back in 1976, when the temperature for that year was lower than the previous century's average. It's the only colder than temperature, the colder than average in my whole lifetime. Every year has been hotter. That means for you, for children born today, we're already, even me, we were all born into an already warming world. Right? This is not our fault, even though we are now part of that system. And another way to put it in perspective, right? We know that these are caused, the temperature rise is caused by its fossil fuel climate change. And if you are 30 years old, more than half, right? If you were born when Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit came out 30 years ago, more than half of all of the carbon emissions into the atmosphere have occurred since you were born. If you're 30 years old, if you know somebody who's 30. For my parents who are in their 70s, they're approaching, they're almost 80. They're approaching 85 to 90% of all carbon emissions have been spewed into the atmosphere, fossil fuel carbon emissions, since they were born, right? This has happened during our grandparents' lives. And we know that it's not just fossil fuel climate change. Air pollution. I'm an atmospheric chemist, and so air pollution is something of great interest to me. We know that air pollution from burning fossil fuels is responsible for over 950 premature deaths each day in the US and 1 in 5 worldwide. And this comes out of research from Harvard's Chan School of Public Health and the GEOS Chem model. It's also the model that I had the honor of being able to work on when I was a postdoc here with the program on climate change. So that research, right, that model is still showing us not just the air pollution impacts, but impacts on us. And particularly from particulate matter, right? And this is just fossil fuel air pollution. This isn't counting the smoke that comes through, right? We now have a smoke season. This isn't counting deaths from smoke that is also exacerbated by fossil fuel climate change. And right, even in our homes, there's a lot of new data coming out about the impact of gas stoves on pediatric asthma. It's now recognized that 12.7% of pediatric asthma is connected to gas stoves. And that's research that just came out about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And children living in homes with gas stoves face comparable risk to asthma to a child living in a household with someone who smokes cigarettes. Right, the pollution that comes from burning a gas stove, it's not, you know, we think of, and I worked on methane in my postdoc. I worked on my global chemical transport model, looking at what would happen if we went to a hydrogen economy and its impact on methane. So I was dealing with methane data sets. And at that time I thought, oh, methane, that's a clean way to do it. I had a methane stove in my home. Most of my appliances were methane. And I didn't realize that it was causing my child to possibly, right, if it's 12.7% of children with asthma that's connected to gas in the home. I had a child with asthma, and now I recognize that it was probably because we had so many gas appliances in our home. When we moved, his asthma nearly cleared up. So, you know, it impacts us even in our homes. And right, we know that climate is impacting 1 in 3 Americans. This is from 2021, has experienced a climate exacerbated weather disaster. And this was just in 2021. These numbers have continued into 2022. We'll see what's going to happen with 2023. We're into it, right? And so things like flooding, I think it starts with changes in, you know, the jet stream, temperatures, heat waves that we had, right? We had the heat wave in June of 2021, smoke that we've been getting, all of these different things. This is showing, you know, the increase in fires, and it's not just wildfires. This is one of your professors here. He's in atmospheric sciences. Some of you might recognize Alex Turner. He's a professor of atmospheric sciences, and he and we co-constructed, kind of facilitated one of the faculty development curriculum workshops. Well, this is his childhood home, where it was. So these fires are not just impacting what we consider kind of nature, wild areas. These are also impacting people's homes, urban areas. And so this is one of the examples in a suburban area in Colorado. And unfortunately, so this happened maybe a month before we talked together. And so it really brought home a lived experience for how we're being impacted. And we know that these impacts, right, this is talking about the heat, right? In Seattle, the number of days over 90 Fahrenheit, I'll often use Fahrenheit in public talks because most Americans don't know Celsius. So I'll talk about things like 90 Fahrenheit or 100 Fahrenheit. Those days have doubled since 1945. I went and I looked at the data, and if you take all of the data that have CTAC, the average used to be about 3 days over 90 a year in the Seattle metro area. Last year we had 13. And so, and if you take decade averages, it's more than doubled. So now we're averaging about 6 to 9, and last year was 13. It was a new record. And we still get cold records broken. So this is a common climate myth, people will talk about how cold it is right now. It snowed in Pasadena just a few days ago, right? And so these cold records are broken as well, but it's the ratio, right? We're seeing 9 heat records broken for every 1 cold record, and this was in the decade of the 2010s to 2020. And we expect that these are going to continue to diverge. If you go into Alaska, where the albedo effect has more of an impact on temperature, in some places like Homer, Alaska, it's more like a 50 to 1 ratio now. And people are starting to care about this. We're seeing changes in people's concern. Comes out of Yale Climate Communication, and back here is 2010, when Anthony Leibowitz was first measuring the American kind of zeitgeist ideas around what do we think about climate change? Are we worried about it? Are we concerned? So there's concerned, cautious, doubtful, disengaged, alarmed. And what I find interesting is the alarm, which is this dark blue bouncing around. Whoops, let's try that again. It's still going. Okay. Look at how it rises. So concerned has always been around 25 to 30%, but it's that alarmed group that is really starting to rise. It used to be around 13, 14%, and now we're up into the 20s. You can take this if you want. Here's the QR code if you want to take this. This is called a SASSY quiz. It's the climate communications at Yale. There, you can see where you land. Are you cautious or doubtful or dismissive? Are you alarmed, disengaged, concerned? Yeah. Stand up if you need to. And folks online, if you want to share with yours, and here, let me grab it, because when you're at home, it's hard to chat for you. There, you can go to that website, Yale Climate Communications, and see where you land. At most public talks that I give, people mostly land on either, you can take a wild guess, where do you think most folks land if you're coming to a talk on climate? Most folks are over here. There will be a few that are just concerned, right? But more than half of Americans now fall into the concerned and alarmed side. And I was talking with Anthony, who started this research when he was at University of Oregon more than 10 years ago. And the alarmed was such a small group. Now he's going to start parsing it out because this is becoming such a large group. Let's see, next. And there's a difference in who is more concerned about climate, according to the research at Yale. And we're seeing this with our students as well, right? Almost everyone, right? 50% or thereabouts are concerned, but people of color in the US, and this is just showing Hispanic and Black, it doesn't include Indigenous or other groups, right? It's 70% Hispanic, Latino, and 57% for Black. And it's more of a generational impact as well, right? Even Republicans are concerned about climate change, and there's a generational divide within, right? It's not just a partisan issue, it's also a generational divide. So 25% of young Republicans worry a great deal about climate. And students are asking. This is a quote from a student. Her name is Shia Bastida. She's at Penn. And she spoke at Biden's climate summit. And this is, I pulled this quote from her talk because it really spoke to me as an educator. Quote, "We demand comprehensive, non-Eurocentric and intersectional climate education, including literacy on climate justice, environmental racism, ancestral and indigenous wisdom, historical movements, disability justice, green careers, and sustainable living." There's a lot packed in just this one quote. And so this kind of leads me, I'll share just briefly what I'm doing with my research and the work that I'm doing at North Seattle College and at Bellevue. So this is me and my colleague, Sonia Doucette, and then this is Irene Shaver. Sonia is at Bellevue College, and about 5 years ago, she started working with faculty at Bellevue, helping them to incorporate climate justice and civic engagement into the curriculum. She's a chemistry professor and a sustainability professor there as well. Irene Shaver is with the State Board for Community Technical Colleges, so she's at the state level. And together we started this work. She started at Bellevue a year later. So 4 years ago, I started it at North Seattle College. And then I also was grateful to be able to work with faculty here at UW for a couple of years. And so this is the type of work that we did, was climate justice faculty learning communities, or climate and environmental justice course development workshops for faculty to help facilitate them doing this work, paying them to do the work. I think it's really important to pay educators to do this type of work. And this is at Bellevue, over 200 faculty have gone through these type of workshops and are incorporating this across the curriculum. So it's not just in STEM. This is in English and art and history and continuing ed, GED, right? If the person is an instructor at the college, they can incorporate climate. Climate touches everything. I've worked with 45 faculty at North Seattle College. We've got another 10 they're going to be joining. We do small groups of about 10 to 15 faculty so that they can have really good conversations, deep conversations around climate justice. What is climate justice? What is civic engagement, community engagement? What does that look like? And then I worked with 23 faculty, which 2 are in the room right here at University of Washington. And then who you saw, Alex Turner is continuing this work here at UW. And this work is now going statewide. So we have a line item in the governor's budget at the legislature level to take the work that we're doing and help faculty across the state. And so this quarter, Sonia and I are working with 17 colleges, 34 faculty who are going to lead these type of communities on their campus. So Tacoma Community College, Highline, Wenatchee Valley, Green River, right? These are all the colleges we're working with this quarter. And then in the spring, each of those faculty that we're training are going to have their group of 10 faculty. So it's kind of a train the trainer model, because I can't be everywhere and neither can Sonia. So it's better to, and there's so many faculty that are already doing sustainability work on their campuses. So to let them run with it is really exciting. And Sonia and I also have a National Science Foundation grant that Sean told you about, the climate justice and undergraduate STEM incorporating civic engagement. For those that are interested in seeing some of our preliminary data, there's a QR code, and Sonia walks through for about 9 minutes, walking through our data so far. And just to show you just one little teaser of it, and I'll come back to this as well. When we survey our students, we do pre and post surveys. And when we ask our students, what issues are you most concerned about in the world today? And we have this long list of issues: pollution, terrorism, racial inequality, loss of natural resources, violent crime, climate change, violence against women, access to safe water. The list goes on. The top 3 consistently have been climate change as number 1. Number 2, racial inequality, inequity, and number 3, mental health. Right. And I think as students, this probably resonates for you as well, right? And again, if anyone wants to see the other data, because we get it, we are assessing our students' understanding of climate justice. And this is for STEM faculty, STEM students in particular. So we're not looking at humanities or arts. This grant is a National Science Foundation grant. But I don't have time to go into that. I want to talk about climate. So I'm a scientist. This quote resonates with me. This is Sarah Myrie. She was a scientist here at University of Washington as well, and oceanographer, and she was also a Drawdown Senior Fellow. And she said, quote, and I apologize for swearing in this, "I should not be expected to be objective about the kind of world I am leaving my child. What a shitty ancestor. What a bad job you are doing if you're going to sit on the sidelines and document the world burning around you." And so she and I think other scientists that speak publicly about the science that we're doing and what the implications are for society often get pushback. And so she's talking about that pushback in here. the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, quote, this is from the 2022, the updating of educational systems from a commercialized, individualized entrepreneurial training model to an education cognizant of planetary health and human well-being can accelerate climate change awareness and action. So we're also incorporating this into our teaching as much as we can, right? That action piece. And also this, so this is Vanessa Nakate. She's a writer and a climate justice activist from Uganda. And she says, quote, we cannot achieve climate justice without racial justice. So recognizing the social justice aspects of climate change, its impact, its disproportionate impact. And so that brings me to climate justice and inter versus intra-generational climate justice. This comes from Ravi Kanvar's work. It also comes from definitions of climate justice in the literature that began as early as the 90s. And the idea of climate justice has been around for decades, centuries. If you think about the work of indigenous peoples to protect. And so intergenerational climate justice is between generations. So this is my kids and their cousins and their great grandma. So you can think about the generation, like grandma's generation and resource use and its impact on younger generations or generations that aren't even here yet, right? That intergenerational climate impacts. And then there's intra. And intragenerational is within the generation. All of us, regardless of our age, whether you're a baby or a grandparent or an elder, we all have a place in intra-generational climate justice. And this wedge diagram that Sonia and I have modified shows kind of the different ways that climate impacts can either be exacerbated or kind of ameliorated based on things like poverty, housing insecurity, employment, food and nutrition, education, and gender. And to kind of put this in perspective, we can think about a climate impact such as PM 2.5, particulate matter, that comes from either forest fires or fossil fuel. We get forest fires. And so things like poverty or unemployment are going to make it harder for an individual or community to contend with that particulate matter. If you can't afford masks, if you can't afford a HEPA filter, if you don't know how to make one of these, this is a box fan filter that my students are making in the classroom, right? And there's ways of shrinking these climate injustices, such as this is the Station Coffee House, and Got Green is a local climate justice organization. And they posted to Instagram, hey, come pick up free air filters when the smoke was coming through. So there's ways to do that. And then, you know, these are, I've been talking about the problems, but I want to talk about how do we talk climate? What are the actions that we take? Because, you know, imagine if doctors just gave the test results, and climate injustices are part of those test results, right? It's not enough to teach the public and our students and each other about the climate crisis and the impacts. We also need to teach the tools, right? The civic and community engagement, how to talk climate with each other to address the problem, to heal and repair. And so, you know, if we look at, most Americans can't even name a living scientist. This is from 2021. So Anthony Fauci, 35% Americans could name him. And then they didn't even name a living one, right? Stephen Hawking. Another stat I heard is that most Americans, like only 18% of Americans know a scientist, right? You are scientists in this room. And so we're a small percentage of the American population. And a strong majority consider it important for us as scientists to inform the public on our research, on the things that we know. And there's often a hesitation among scientists to talk about things that are outside of their expertise. I'm an atmospheric chemist, right? I am not a dynamicist, I'm not an oceanographer, but I do feel compelled, right? Just as a 5-year-old can tell somebody to stop smoking around a baby. I have enough information to be able to talk about climate and to talk about things like ocean acidification and to share the information that I do have. And so hopefully, you probably know more than 99% of the population out there about climate. Share it, no. And so one of the ways to do that is to talk climate. This is an organization that I helped co-found with a fellow climate scientist and also mental and medical health professionals. And so we have psychologists, therapists that work with us to help us come up with ways to talk with, and we focus on people who work with either young students or kids, but I think it really also, you can pass these out, take one if you want, how to talk with folks about climate in ways that empower, in ways that help people to hold the uncertainty, right? There's a lot of uncertainty around climate. To tell the truth about the root causes, that it is fossil fuel and it's based in inequities and injustice. And to use a harm reduction approach. You are not going to talk with a 4-year-old about climate the same way you're going to talk with a 14-year-old. Just like if grandma is sick, you're not going to talk with a 4-year-old about the test results, right? Whereas with a 14-year-old, they might be interested in knowing what the test results are if grandma's not feeling well. And then, make it fun. Use senses, use music, art, fashion, things like that. And then we've also worked, this is a National Science Foundation grant with the University of Washington. K through 12, they have STEM teaching tools. And so we collaborated with them around this graphic and then came up with a STEM teaching tool for teachers to know, hey, how do we talk about climate with our students?
Yeah, this really reminds me of that book, Underwear Do's and Don'ts.
Oh, really?
Do you ever know that?
No, can you share that with me? Thanks. And so different places where you can talk climate. You can, and these are examples that we also give to our faculty as they're incorporating civic and community engagements into their teaching. Policy. I will, in my online class, show students how to register to vote. I'm not telling them how to vote, but I'm showing them where to register to vote, or so that they know, encouraging others to register, volunteering in your community or in an organization, outreach, even protest. And so just to kind of walk through some of these examples. So different ideas of civic and community engagements where you can talk, right? You can give presentations, you can do things on social media, right? You can talk about climate or talk about the personal things that you're doing in your life. Those things ripple out, right? It's we have lots of individual actions that we can do, but it is our individual actions that can lead to those systemic changes that everyone benefits from, right? Not everyone can afford an electric car, not everyone can afford to put solar on their homes, but everyone benefits if the buses are electric, including people that live near the freeways, right? That are breathing that air. Everyone benefits when there's community solar, so that your apartment or your dorm can have clean electricity. So it's those systemic changes, and it's happening. Washington State got its first electric school bus in Tacoma at Franklin High School. Solar energy is really dropping in price. It used to be in 1977, it was $70 per watt. Now we're down to just a few cents if you're going with community-based. Washington State has the earliest gas car ban in the US, even earlier than California. California is usually leading the way on this. So this is for 2030 versus 2035. And then United States, yeah, so just more on Washington's gas car ban. Other examples. So this is social media. This is Marcus Bose. He is a professor in the medical school here. And when he does his rounds as a pediatrician, he wears this button. Ask me why climate health is kids' health. And then I wear my dress and I've got one of his buttons there, that climate stripe. Some of your professors, I believe, this is from a PoE capstone. So a student was sharing their environment 492 poster. This is maybe one of your professors you might recognize. Dargan Friedson there, and he looks remarkably similar to Leonardo DiCaprio in that image. Other ways, voting. So we talked about this, attending lobby days, right? The session is in right now. So if you have an opinion, you can voice it, whether. Here's more on art. This is Judy Tweet. She's the one that I got the idea for making my climate dress because she gave a TED talk and was wearing this one. I thought it was amazing. So hers are by month. And then art. So this is Lila Pozzo. She is here. She's in the chemical engineering department. And this is art by a student at Whitman College. Doing art on different scientists and stuff. And she studies battery technology. Here again is policy. So this is Marcus and me and a student, another UW student, and we're meeting with our legislators. So this is the staff, I believe from Cantwell's office was this particular meeting. And then getting also in touch with more just examples of getting in touch with elected officials. These are protectors of the Salish Sea, calling on the governor to declare a climate emergency. What else? Joining and volunteering community organizations, advising organizations, donating your creativity. These are a bunch of local and national organizations. This one's right here on campus, Institutional Climate Action, which includes faculty, students, alumni. If you're interested, they're a very active group on campus. Climate Change Makers is a great organization if you're wanting to find small ways to get in touch with your legislators or to kind of push the needle. Again, there's that example from Got Green and my students making a box fan filter. And here's the ICA students, the Institutional Climate Action at UW doing their work. So this is examples of protest. And they have been pretty successful. They have pushed, and now the University of Washington is going to divest its investments from fossil fuels within the next few years, thanks to their efforts. But there's often also a price to be paid for this type of civil disobedience. It doesn't. So this is a NASA scientist, Peter Kalmus, and he is protesting and he was arrested for his protest. I think he had either glued himself or chained himself to a Chase Bank. He also protested at AGU, which is a meeting that many of us attend, and his colleague who he did the protest with worked for the Department of Energy and lost her job. He works at NASA. He didn't lose his job. So there's risk for scientists taking part in protests. It does not come without risk. This is the Protectors of the Salish Sea again, calling on our governor to declare a climate emergency. So lots of protests out there. Push the needle. This is me and my colleagues at a chemistry. We did a climate strike. All that Greta Thunberg. This is James Hansen, who used to be the director of NASA Goddard, and he's being again arrested for climate protest. And then here I am with my family at a protest where I spoke. And then Peter again arrested. So I want to get us talking. We've got about 15-20 minutes. And I want to ask you, which of the following is an example of a climate action with a focus on systemic change? Because it's system change that's going to address this, right? We can do individual changes, that can be a ripple. But which of these, and it could be more than one, so go ahead and look at that, and folks online, go ahead and look at that. What do you think? Which of the following is an example of climate action with a focus on systemic change? And I can read them too. A is track, calculate, and modify your personal carbon footprint through actions such as choosing to take a road trip rather than flying. B, calling a state legislator about impacts of ocean acidification on local shellfish industry. C, eating a plant-based diet, riding a bus, installing a heat pump or induction stove, and or changing your light bulbs to more energy efficient LED. And then D, attending a city hall meeting about phasing out methane gas use and sharing what you learned with your friends, family, or classmates. Which of those? Is it all of them? Is it just a few of them? Check with your neighbor. Sean and Jeff, you can.
I guess I was talking about all the media, but black holes and that was we just did a good job. Which ones are like, yeah. We're all yeah. Collectively, I mean, you can tell me. I mean,
I think E is the most because it's like it's just like it's creating the system change by sharing with more people.
Any of the other ones like that?
I mean, I feel like it could all be.
Uh-huh.
But, yeah.
Oh, yeah. This is my hint, with a focus on systemic. Which other one?
B.
About 30 more seconds. Yeah, folks, if you're online, put it in the chat. What do you think? You can throw out which ones you think it is, A, B, C, and or D. Could be more than one. You got your answers? Bring your head. Okay. So these are the ones when Sonia and I are working with faculty. Yeah, got this book. We got it. B, absolutely right. Calling a state legislator about impacts of ocean acidification on the local shellfish industry. Right, you're talking climate. You're talking to somebody. You're getting out. It's system change. Attend a city hall meeting about phasing out methane gas use and share what you learned with family, friends, and classmates is another one, right? Because you're attending a meeting, right? You're a body in the room that makes the legislators that are there, the people that are the decision makers know that there's people in the community that care about it. So even just attending, even without sharing it, even just being in the room is a example of climate action, but you can take it even further and learn what you've learned you can share. So why is A and C not considered? They are climate actions, but why are they missing a focus on systemic change? And can you think of a way, how would you change A and C so that they can include systemic change? So check with your neighbor, and folks online, you can just throw out, what do you think? How are some ways you can change A and B, or sorry, A and C, so that they can include that systemic change.
Sometimes I say I never see that.
What do you mean? I guess like encourage my reading. Maybe like. I guess like. Like figures and not. My modifying. Yeah. Like literally, she's still gonna be doing.
Well, I'm taking the environment 2:30 now. Yeah.
Like. That's like another factor. Land.
You know, like, we can't, we're, other countries, so they surround. One more minute and then I'll have folks share out what ideas came up.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. So like you just.
All right, guess we won't go a full minute. You ready? So what do you think? Let's start with A. How can we change A, which is track, calculate, and modify your personal carbon footprint through actions such as choosing to take a road trip rather than flying? How can that be turned into with a focus on systemic change? That action by itself, it is a climate action, but it's not spurring systemic on its own. If that person chooses to go on a road trip, what can they do to make
Well,
it
I feel
systemic?
like for when we were talking, I feel like for both A and C, we can combine them and just create like a social media platform. That way people can, you know, experience like maybe a TikTok video, be like, hey, we're on a road trip. Who wants to go out on the world with me?
Yeah, sharing, share the road trip. with the world. Yeah, go ahead, Jess.
Someone in the chat wanted to share their thoughts on any cost of.
Yeah, make electric vehicles affordable and charging stations more available, make roads and freeways easy to commute and access.
Yeah. So that would absolutely be a systemic change. Other ideas that came up around A. Yeah, I like that, the sharing out with others about the road trip.
Well, also on the other side, just like talking to people how bad flying is for the environment, just like getting them aware of the issue.
There's a group here in Seattle, El Centro de la Raza, and also the Beacon Hill Environmental Justice Task Force, and they do a lot of community organizing around flying and the expansion of SeaTac and its impact on things like
the particulate matter and its impact on the people that live near the airport, on pregnant people who it impacts, the fetus, it impacts, all kinds of health outcomes. So yeah, organizations, right, that are part of that as well. Any thoughts on that? How about C? Things, these individual things like eating a plant-based diet, riding the bus, installing a heat pump or induction stove, or changing light bulbs.
So we kind of just said, like, talking to your local legislators and encouraging local governments to provide more funding or subsidize, I guess, less funding for agriculture and traditional, like, livestock, and then more funding towards, like, public transportation and energy efficient vehicles and, like, government.
Yeah, absolutely. So to reiterate some of what you said, right, increase in public transportation, right? Taking the bus is great, but increasing that access for everyone to be able to do it. Installing heat pumps or induction stoves is great for an individual to do if they want to clean up the air quality in their home or their neighborhood. But making that system change, right? The Washington State Building Council voted and it passed that all new construction will now be heated with heat pumps, not with methane gas furnaces. And so that goes into effect in April. That's next month. So these are quick systemic changes. And in that building code, it also includes that those buildings must also have the electrical so that induction stoves can be used if the owners want to install those. It's not banning gas stoves, but it's making the transition to electric easier and more effective. Any other things that come up around C? How about this eating a plant-based diet? How could that be turned into a systemic climate action? Yes.
Yeah, we talked about school lunches and implementing more healthy plant-based options within school.
So pushing on your school, even pushing on UW, right? To offer more plant-based, sustainable packaging, things like that, and the foods themselves. How about if you eat or you have this great plant-based meal or something? How can you make that kind of a ripple out?
Instagram, put my dinner on Instagram.
Yeah, take a picture of it. Put it on Instagram.
For your family and friends, like introduce them to that.
Potlucks.
Blog about it.
What was that one?
Blog
about it. Share the recipe on your blog, right? Or on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, right? So if you're making those individual actions, you can turn them into a systemic ripple by sharing it with the community. And we've got about 5 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and end there with this list of resources and then take whatever questions you've got.
Great.
So thank you.
We have like 5 minutes. Let's go ahead and have some questions. If you have some questions.
Go for it.
What would you say to someone who maybe feels like the science and scientists don't have their best interests at heart?
If you look at the polling data, people tend to trust scientists. They trust nurses most, and then doctors, and then scientists. So the trust is there with the general public. I think that there is a lot of misinformation out there, and the way that I would address if somebody was skeptical of science is to ask questions of them, like, where are you getting your information? And I find that when people are skeptical, and I've got people in my own family who are skeptical about climate science of all things. And so, when we were looking at this, let's go back to it. The folks that are here, the dismissives, which is about 9% of the population, it tends to be based on ideology, and there's nothing we can do to change someone's mind, because for them, it is a belief So I often get asked, do you know, or I hear people say, do you believe in climate change? I'm a climate scientist and I do not believe in climate change. Because it's not a religion. It's based on science. I understand climate change and I understand that the science behind it. And for the science that I don't understand, I trust NASA. I trust the universities like University of Washington. And I even trust, to a certain degree, the military to have the science right. And so, yeah, when I'm thinking and talking about global warming, I'm really clear that I don't believe in global warming. And I think that the journalists should stop using belief and believe, should start talking more about, do people understand it? And so, and then with, yeah, talking with people about it, listen more than, right? We're not going to convince people by telling them they're wrong. We're going to convince people by asking them questions, by building community, by, you know, shared interests, things like that. Yeah.
That's exactly what my mom used to say. She doesn't believe in it, and she's about understanding it. But also, just remind me of her. What news sources or like media outlets do you trust to be not only like factual, obviously, but mainly unbiased and impartial in a way that like could be understandable and accessible to both sides?
I don't watch TV, so I'm very skeptical of any media that is dependent upon financial backing. Even the New York Times. I've had conversations with the former CEO of the New York Times. And you know, even the New York Times has advertising, right? Their advertising budget is helping the fossil fuel industry, and so I see that as a bit of a conflict of interest there. And so until you know these media divest themselves from the fossil fuel industry, it's hard for me to. There are great journalists there, you know, and they have a great climate desk, but overall, there's some real problematic issues with their opinion desk. So my news, I read a lot of scientific journal articles. I listen a lot of public news, and yeah, not let's see, I don't know, Nature, Science, I mean, those are journals, AGU, things like that. And yeah, not a lot from, I don't watch TV, so I don't watch anything like that. I'm very skeptical of for-profit media. Yeah, I think nonprofit media is, for me, the way to go, so.
Today in class, we were looking at, like climate deniers, and a lot of them brought up alarmism and people shouldn't be alarmed. And I mean, the data shows that people are alarmed. If you think that's a good, bad thing, that people are now more alarmed.
I think it is a good thing that people are catching up and recognizing the dire straits that we're in, really, as a society, right? We have, I didn't go into the data at all, but you look at the Holocene, the stable climate of the past 10, 12,000 years, where carbon dioxide very rarely went over about 300 parts per million. And now we're, you know, an ice age shift in the wrong direction, right? You think about 280 for the depths of, or sorry, 180 for the depths of an ice age, 280 for kind of the average during Holocene or warm periods, interglacials, and we're up at 420. So we've made that shift. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, do you think alarmism, like a lot of people think that it causes like a lot of anxiety in people, and that like we should avoid like alarming people about climate change?
I think people are alarmed, rightfully so. And I think that having anxiety about the shifting climate is normal. I think for folks that are not alarmed, either they don't understand what's going on, or, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to always feel climate anxiety. right? You can be alarmed about something and have ways of coping, ways of holding those emotions to where you can mitigate the anxiety and the grief and things like that. Just like if you have a sick loved one, right? You have ways of mitigating that pain, that grief. And so it's the same thing around climate anxiety and climate grief, right? People are going to feel it. And how are we going to help people to hold those emotions? Because we're in a time of great change. And climate change it's marching forward, right? The amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is still going up. It's not, right? We're not bending the curve on that yet, even though solar and wind and ways of storing energy are starting to catch up, right? So yeah, we're going to have we already, I think, are having a mental health crisis, and climate is going to be a bigger and bigger part of that as people catch on to what's going on. So that is okay. Yeah, and part of what we're doing with Top Climate is a lot of that work. Right now, we're working with the National PTA and coming up with a climate emotions pamphlet for teachers and parents. And it's all about that. It's how do you talk to your kids about climate in a way that supports them emotionally, because it's similar to talking to your kids about when grandma's sick, right? We want to be honest and share that information, but we want to do it in a trauma-informed, protective way. That's good.
Great, because also like part of the story is that we're making them sick.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, like it's a very difficult story.
Mhm.
Like this is like the upsetting piece of all of this.
We're part of that system. Yeah. And yeah, I think declaring a climate emergency, right? Do we declare a personal climate emergency? How much do we modify our own systems? But I'm really down on purity tests. I don't think that individual action, people should not be shamed for their individual actions, people in this room. Sure, the person who's flying out to Park City twice a week, yeah, that's not okay. That's pretty gross. But for the general public, we should not be shaming ourselves. We are in this system where we can move to shift it as much as we can for the system change that's effective. Don't blame each other. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you everybody for your questions. I want to respect everyone's time, so I think we should stay just on.
Thanks, everybody.